All right, today we are diving into one of the biggest, most important moments in all of human history, the Industrial Revolution. Now, this wasn't just about a few new gadgets and gizmos. This was a complete rewiring of how people lived, how they worked, how they even thought about the world. And honestly, its aftershocks are still shaping everything around us today. To really get a grip on just how massive this change was, we kind of have to become time travelers for a minute.
So let's do a little thought experiment. I want you to imagine you're living in, say, England around 1820. You fall into a deep, deep sleep, and you don't wake up for exactly 100 years. It's now 1920. The world you'd open your eyes to would be, well, it would be completely, utterly, mind-bendingly unrecognizable. Think about it. In 1820, your life runs on the sun and the seasons. Power comes from your own muscles, or maybe a horse. 100 years later, your life runs on the clock, down to the minute. Power is coming from steam and electricity. You're not walking or riding a cart, you're hopping on trains and in cars, and you're communicating through radio waves. For thousands of years, life had been pretty much the same, generation after generation. And then, bam, in the span of a single human lifetime, literally everything changed.
So how on earth did the world get turned upside down so fast? Well, it all boils down to one fundamental shift. We went from a world run on muscle to a world run on machines.
So what we're talking about here is this intense period of change, stretching from the mid-1700s to the early 1900s. It's when societies that were built around farming and making things by hand got totally remade into industrial, city-based economies. And it's so important to get this. It wasn't like a switch was flipped. It was a long, messy, revolutionary process.
But that brings up a huge question, right? Why Britain? Out of all the places in the entire world, why did this global firestorm kick off on this one relatively small island?
Well, the truth is, Britain had this unique cocktail of ingredients, just the perfect storm of conditions, really. For starters, a revolution in agriculture meant they could produce way more food. More food meant a bigger population, and a lot of those people could now leave the farms to do other work. They were also literally sitting on top of massive amounts of coal and iron. And crucially, they had rich investors who are actually willing to take a gamble on brand new, crazy ideas. Add to that a huge colonial empire that provided raw materials and a place to sell finished goods, and the fact that the island was pretty peaceful compared to war-torn Europe, and yeah, you've got a recipe for revolution.
But the actual trigger, the thing that lit the fuse, it wasn't some grand, complicated plan. It was something way, way more basic. The population was growing, and all those new people, they needed clothes. The old way of doing things, people weaving in their homes, it just couldn't keep up. The demand for more cloth was getting desperate.
And this pressure created this amazing domino effect of invention. First, you get the flying shuttle, which made weaving way faster. Suddenly, the weavers needed tons more thread. So to solve that, you get the spinning jenny, which let one worker do the job of dozens. Then, the water frame hooked these machines up to the power of rivers, creating the very first factories. But the absolute game changer, that was the steam engine. It could use coal to create power pretty much anywhere, freeing factories from the riverbanks and, powering the trains that would soon connect the entire country.
Now, for a good long while, Britain was the world's workshop, the only industrial powerhouse. But an idea this big, this powerful, there's no way it was going to stay on one little island. The revolution was about to go global, and it was about to get a major upgrade.
You can really see this whole thing evolving in two distinct phases. Phase 1, that's Britain's story. It's all about coal, steam, and making cloth. But then, look at Phase 2. The whole center of gravity shifts. Now we're talking about the USA and Germany. The energy isn't just steam, it's oil and electricity. The big industries are now steel, chemicals, and all things electrical. This wasn't just more of the same. It was a whole new ballgame.
So how did these new kids on the block overtake the original pioneer? Well, Germany, which had just become a single country in 1871, immediately started pouring money into scientific research, building world-class chemical and electrical industries. The United States, on the other hand, had a totally different advantage. It was a massive country stuffed with raw materials, with a huge built-in market for its own goods. Plus, it basically invented the giant industrial corporation. While Britain started it all, it was just a bit slower to adapt to all these new technologies and new ways of doing business.
Okay,
Now we get to what is maybe the most important part of this whole story. We've talked a lot about machines and economies, but what did this all mean for actual people? Because this revolution didn't just change how folks worked, it completely ripped up and rewrote the rules of society itself, right from the ground up.
If you want to see what this looked like, just look at a city like Manchester, the heart of the whole textile boom. In a single century, it went from a town of about 20,000 people to a sprawling, smoke-choked city of 400,000. That's not just growth, that's an explosion. It was a human tidal wave, as people flooded in from the countryside, all of them desperate to find work.
But we have to be really clear about this. This incredible growth was not some happy story of progress for everyone. For the huge majority of people who actually powered this revolution, life in these new cities and factories was absolutely brutal. This progress came at a staggering human cost.
It's so easy for us to use vague phrases like poor working conditions, but it's vital we understand the reality. This quote here is from a witness account of the death of a child worker named Mary Richards. She was killed by the unguarded machinery she was forced to work near. See, the rate of business failure was over 50%, so factory owners cut every single corner they could just to survive. And that meant using the cheapest labor they could find, which was often children, in the most dangerous conditions you can possibly imagine.
This new economy also created a brand new social ladder. The old world of nobles and peasants where you were born into your station in life, that was pretty much thrown out the window. It was replaced by a new system, one based on your job in the industrial economy. At the very top, you had the bourgeoisie, the owners, the guys who owned the factories and the banks. Then you had a growing middle class of professionals, doctors, lawyers, managers. And then, at the bottom, forming this huge base of the pyramid, was the proletariat, the working class, the millions of people who had nothing to sell but their own ability to work.
So what does all of this history have to do with us today? The thing is, the Industrial Revolution isn't just a dusty chapter in a textbook. Its echo is all around us, shaping our modern world in ways we might not even see. You can actually draw a direct line from the factory floor to the battlefields of the 20th century. I mean, think about it. Industrial economies are hungry. They need a constant supply of raw materials and new places to sell their stuff. This hunger fueled the age of imperialism, a crazy global race to snatch up colonies. And, of course, these giant industrial empires, Britain, Germany, France, they started bumping into each other. And that intense rivalry, it was one of the main reasons the world plunged into the catastrophe of World War I.
All of this social chaos also gave birth to the big political ideas that, frankly, still run our world today. On one side, you had the ideology of the factory owners, economic liberalism, which is all about free trade and capitalism. But as a direct reaction to the brutal conditions and inequality, powerful new ideas popped up. Socialism and communism were born right out of the slums and factories, and they offered a completely different vision for how society should work.
But maybe the deepest legacy of all is something we just take for granted. Just think about your own life. You just expect technology to change, right? You expect the world your kids will grow up in will be wildly different from yours. That feeling, that basic assumption that the world is always in a state of rapid change, that's a really new idea in the grand scheme of human history. It's only a couple hundred years old.
Which brings us right back to our thought experiment, but with a little twist for today. Let's say you close your eyes right now, in our world of AI and gene editing and instant global communication, and you wake up 100 years from now. Given the insane accelerating pace of change that all started in a British textile mill 250 years ago, how unbelievably weird is the world going to be?